Thank you for the live audience of 7. And welcome, Facebook people. We're glad you're here tonight. That was the most contact I just got in several weeks, so thank you for that. Haven't had physical contact in weeks. Well, I wanted to start tonight talking about a person from the 14th century, because that's just fun. A man named Ashikaga Yoshimitsu was a gentleman that lived in Japan, and he was considered the third shogun of Japan, which is a military title. He broke his favorite tea bowl one day. He was in his house, and he broke his favorite tea bowl. And when that happened, he was really distraught about it and didn't really know how to fix it. And so he decided that he would send the tea bowl to China, because apparently in China they fixed these things. And so months later, he gets the tea bowl back, and he's horrified to discover that the tea bowl was put together with this like rugged metal staples. And it just, this really precious tea bowl that he had at one point came back to him completed, but not in the appearance that he liked it. And he was really distraught about that. So what he did is he charged his craftsmen to come up with a better solution that would be more aesthetically pleasing to him. And so they came up with a solution where it would not necessarily hide the damage, but what it would do is it would make something properly artful out of it. And what they came up with was they used a mixture of lacquer and an expensive powdered gold. And with that process, they put the broken pieces of the pottery, they fused them back together into something that was really beautiful it's a Japanese art form called Kintsugi. Now, normally I have a picture to show you, but we're a little limited with our resources today, so you can Google it. But Kintsugi is the name of the art form. And Kintsugi is a Japanese word that's divided into two. Kin, K-I-N, literally that word means golden. And sugi, the second part of that word, means joinery. So literally translated, it means join with gold, kintsugi. And most other repair methods in Japan at this point, they would desire to hide the damage. They would desire to kind of disguise the damage of when you're repairing something. Kintsugi actually highlights the damaged pieces, and it turns it into something that's beautiful and artful. You know, I was looking up Kintsugi, this whole process, and I was really fascinated with what I was discovering and seeing some of the pictures of it. And there's 5 things that I kind of realized as I was reading about this art form that really struck me. Kintsugi treats the breakage, it treats the repair as part of the history of an object and not something that should be disguised. And I thought that was really fascinating. Another thing about Kintsugi is that the philosophy behind it is it kind of shows that the broken pieces should be able to attract respect and attention and should be repaired with enormous care. The third thing I discovered is that this process in Japan actually symbolizes a reconciliation with flaws and accidents of time, things that just happen, either a flaw or an accident, that this whole process of Kintsugi represents this reconciliation with that. The fourth thing is that there should be no attempt in this process to disguise the damage, to not hide the fact that it was at one point damaged, but it's actually to render the fault lines in this damaged piece of pottery beautiful and actually strong. And then lastly, the precious veins of gold that you would see in this kind of art form, this kind of pottery, it actually emphasizes the struggle. It doesn't deny that it ever existed. You know, this process that they use, it's restored in 2 ways with 2 different types of materials. The one is a lacquer, which is kind of a shellac that's formed with alcohol. And what it does is it dries in such a hard form, that it creates a really protective, a strong protective coating and bond. And the second thing that they use is a sprinkled, expensive powdered gold, which creates the beauty in it. And I was thinking about this whole process of Kintsugi, and I was thinking about lives. My life, your life, the lives of people that we know that are broken or damaged in some visible, noticeable way. And I was asking myself some of the questions is, how many times do we desire to hide the damage that we've experienced? How many times do we try to disguise the cracks in our lives? How many times do we not treat the breakage and the repair as part of the history of our lives, but instead we see it as something to hide or pretend that it never even happened? You know, our broken pieces should be able to attract respect and attention and be handled with enormous care. And how many times is that not the case? Not just within our own personal friendships, but even the church. You know, we don't tend to render our fault lines as something beautiful or strong. And we certainly don't like to emphasize our struggle, do we? A couple weeks ago, I was at McAllister's Deli. And while I was waiting in line for my meal, standing there by the counter, I noticed that there was a basket out front. And if you've been to McAllister's, you've seen the basket. It's in virtually every one that I've ever seen. And on this basket, there's a little sign, and the sign is really subtle, and it says, "Broken and unloved cookies, 75 cents. And this one day, as I was waiting for my meal to be served and waiting for my drink or to pay or whatever, I'm looking at this basket, broken and unloved cookies, 75 cents. And I pondered at the very subtle but powerful message that was giving. The message is broken equals unloved. You know, those two words, by very definition, are not synonymous. Something can be broken and still be loved. You think about a child and their toy. You think about so many different examples that we can think of ways of something that's broken and we still love it. But yet the message in McAllister's on this little basket of cookies is these are broken cookies and therefore they're unloved. And the second message, which I think was probably more damning than the first, is that broken plus unloved equals less value. They weren't sold for the same price that a whole cookie was sold for. You know, last I checked, cookie ingredients, the cookies have the same ingredients, whether you're whole or you're broken. In fact, take a whole cookie and eat it, and then take a broken cookie and eat it, and you know what? They still taste delicious. And yet somehow on this message that McAllister's unconsciously communicating is that broken and unloved cookies are less value. You know, I think they both still serve the purpose for which they were created. But here's what I found really most interesting as I stood there that day and I was waiting for my food and pondering of the sermon that was in my head about this cookie basket. I decided I'd take a peek. I wanted to kind of look in the basket. And here's what's interesting. Here's what I found. It was empty. It was empty. Why was it empty? Because someone thought there was value in the broken, unloved cookie. Someone thought the worthless cookies were worth the price. And if that's not a picture of the gospel, I don't know what is. The story is told of a philosopher who was named Senrikyo. Rikyo is his name. He was on a journey through southern Japan. And on this journey, he visited a man who was trying to impress him when he arrived. So Rikyu shows up to this man's house, and he's this famous philosopher in Japan at the time. And he decided to bring out some of his expensive pottery and some of his more expensive things. And as he's pulling out all of these really expensive pottery from China and all these other places in the Orient, Rikyu is really could care less about what's being presented in front of him. In fact, at the time when he was showing him all these expensive vases and different pottery that was there, Rikyu was fascinated with a branch that was outside and how the wind was affecting it. So the host was getting really frustrated that he's got all this really expensive, fine pottery, china type stuff, and this philosopher is not caring at all about this. And Riku left that day and continued his journey. And after he left, the host was so frustrated that he wasn't impressed with his precious pottery that he took one of the vases that was particularly special to him and he threw it on the ground and it smashed into pieces. And he retired into his room. The other guests at the party here in southern Japan were familiar with the process of kintsugi. And they decided to collect the pieces of pottery, and through the process of kintsugi, they decided to put them back together. Months go by, and this philosopher, Riku, decided to pay a visit again to this host. And when he went in to the host's home, he immediately saw this vase. The vase that he previously had not paid any attention to. He immediately saw this vase, but this time the vase was fixed through the process of kintsugi. Remember, it has the lacquer and the expensive gold particles, and it created a sense of beauty. And when Riku saw it, he entered the home and he saw the vase and he stopped in his tracks and he said, in Japanese, he said, "That is magnificent." You know, I was thinking about the whole kintsugi process. I was thinking about the story of Riku. I was thinking about this pottery and this art form. And there's something that this culture understands about brokenness that we haven't figured out yet. There's something about the process of brokenness and the process of being whole again that we still haven't figured out, even in the church. We sometimes view or we feel that something is broken and therefore there's no value in it. Or something is broken and therefore it has less worth to us. Or not until it's repaired, and repaired in such a way that you can't see that it was ever damaged to begin with. That's kind of our mindset. And I remember as a child breaking different things in my house, and I remember how hard I worked. You know, one particular item I broke, I remember how hard I worked to put it back together again so that my mom never knew it was broken to begin with. And if you're honest and if you can reflect on the things that you've broken in your past, you kind of do the same thing, because we have this pressure that we've felt from our earliest day that broken is not good. And not only is it not good, but we've got to repair it in a way that no one ever knows it was broken to begin with. And somehow, the Japanese culture, through the process of kintsugi, decided, you know what, knock it off. You know what, stop it. In fact, let's take the broken pieces and let's put them back together, not as if they were never broken. Let's put them back together in a way that highlights the brokenness, highlights the cracks, highlights that this was once damaged and now it's not. Why don't we do that? You know, I marvel at the role. I'm on staff at a church, and I marvel sometimes at what happens when I see on a Sunday morning and someone comes in. In fact, it happened not too many weeks ago where we were doing communion, and a woman came to the altar of communion, and she was almost apologizing that she was so hurting, and she was just bawling, just crying her eyes out, because she obviously was doing some business with God, and there was obviously some pain in her past that she couldn't reconcile. And she's sitting there bawling, saying, I'm so sorry. And I'm sitting there thinking, what are you sorry about? This is the place where you come. You know, a couple months ago, I had a kidney stone. Never had a kidney stone before, but I had a kidney stone. And when I went to the hospital, I got rushed to the hospital because I was in some serious pain. Don't joke with that. That's serious pain, those kidney stones. And I went to the hospital, and on my way into the door of the hospital, I literally had to stop outside the door of the hospital, and the pain was so great that I ended up vomiting before I could ever enter. You know how you feel after that? Like your breath's nasty and you just feel gross. When I walked into the hospital, I didn't say, I'm really sorry that I'm not looking my best right now. I didn't say, can I brush my teeth before I speak with you, because I feel more comfortable doing that. I walked in the hospital, God knows what I look like. I mean, I was hurting, core sore hurt. And I walked in, and you know what they did? They didn't say, hey, why don't you clean yourself up before you walk in here? They didn't judge me. They didn't stop and say, you know what? You're a little too broken for us. No, what they did is what you expect in a hospital. I walked in, and they embraced me. They said, you're in the right place. Where else would I go for such a condition? I had to go to that place, and I had to be met by those people. And I knew walking in, as hurt as I was and as much pain, and I just felt ugly. I felt gross. I walked in, and I didn't care because I knew I was in the right place. How many of us hide our brokenness? How many of us struggle with a secret, a past? And we hide it because we think that's what we have to do. And we try to put ourselves together in a way that no one can ever tell that there was a pain, there was a crack, there was a brokenness. And not only does it not work, but it does a real disservice to the restoration process. I think if more of us were honest about where we've been, and we found a community like ICU Talks that's open and says, hey, come. You don't have to have it all together. It's okay if you're vomiting on your way in the door. It's okay if you didn't comb your hair and brush your teeth. It's okay if your life is untucked. You don't got to get it all together yet. Come, be in the hospital where you belong. Be with other people that relate with you. Be with people who are trained surgeons of the soul that can help you get well. We know that when our marriage is hurting, we go to a counselor. But sometimes I think we forget that when our soul is hurting, we should be able to find a church. We should be able to find a Christian. We should be able to find a community that says, hey, I understand. I used to be just like that. And let me show you how I was restored, how I was put back together. Not in a way that you can never see the damage, in a way that's beautiful, and it highlights the cracks and the places. Another time for another day, I had spent some time, I was incarcerated. Not a lot of people know that. I'll tell you that story another time, but I was incarcerated for 93 days. When I got out, it was a non-criminal offense, by the way. People are hiding their purses all of a sudden. When I got out, I served a 6-month sentence. I was sentenced for 6 months. I only served 3 because I escaped. But just kidding. But when I got out, I got a job in the insurance field. And one day, my job was, I was in health insurance at the time, and my job was to interview clients and interview in the sense I had to ask a lot of questions, a lot of personal questions about their lives and their past in order to see if they would qualify for coverage. So one day I had an appointment in a restaurant with a woman who was a waitress. And I walked into the restaurant, and I was in a suit and tie, kind of dressed for the part. And I had my laptop and a briefcase type of thing, and I sit down at this table, and I need to ask some questions. And so she sits down. She's on her shift, but she sits down in between clients. And she sits down with me this one day, and I said, hey, nice to meet you. I'm Rod. Let me ask you a few questions. As I'm asking these questions, these are really basic questions. They're not anything that's inappropriately personal. They're just important for the application. And as I'm asking her these questions, I could sense a resistance. I could sense that something was going on where she didn't want to be honest. And I kept trying to think, why? Why are you resisting this? This is an insurance application. I need these answers. But I could just sense in my spirit that there was something. And as I asked certain probing questions, and I kept getting a closed door, I kept getting the sense that there was something in her past that she did not want me to know. In fact, more specifically than that, there was something in her timeline that she did not want me to know. In the middle of these questions, she said, I have to go and take care of this table number 4. So she leaves, and I'm sitting there with my laptop. I'm sitting there with my application for her. And I thought, you know what? I just had something prompt me and said, show her your mugshot. And I thought, well, that's an odd thing to show a client. Like, I'm an insurance agent. She doesn't want to see that I've been to jail. Like, this is not how this works, God, if it's you telling me this. But I just had this sense, show her your mugshot. So I said, all right. So I got on the computer and I pulled up my mugshot and I turned it around. And she came back to the table and I said, hey, I want to show you something. And she looked really puzzled at what I was about to show her. And I turned the laptop screen so she could see it. And when she looked at it, she said in a curse word, no kidding. No kidding. And you know what happened? All the walls dropped. They all came down. You know why? Because I showed her my piece of pottery, not as it was all together. I showed her my life with Kintsugi in it. She looked at me and thought, oh, what a nice piece of vase. This is an insurance agent. He's looked all together. He's never had the problems I've had. And when I turned that photo around and she saw my mugshot, immediately she recognized exactly what it was. And you know what she told me? She'd been incarcerated. She got it. She thought it would disqualify her from the application. Guess what? It didn't. I just needed to know. You relate to that? What would happen if a room full of people decided, I'm going to live my life like Kintsugi. I'm going to live my life in such a way that I'm going to show the cracks. I'm going to show every piece of my pottery that's been broken so that you can see that any beauty in me is not because I've never been busted. It's because I've been busted, and through the process of healing and restoration, through the power of Christ, I've been healed. Y'all, can you imagine if a group of us decided to live wide open like that? What would happen? You know, think about Romans chapter 5, verse 6. It says, you see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. While we were still broken, while we were still on the floor, while we were still a cracked pot, while we were still a mess, while we were still damaged, Christ died for us, for me and you. That, my friends, is magnificent. Let's live our lives in such a way that we can say, God, I've been broken, but through the holy lacquer, through the expensive powdered gold of your blood, you put me back together in a way that the world pays attention and they look at your life and they say, that is magnificent. I want that. Let's live that way. Let's pray. God, we are grateful for you being a God that understands brokenness. You're not afraid of walking into our personal hell. You're not afraid of our ugly parts. You're not afraid of the things that we are ashamed of or that we try to hide. God, you come right in and you use the broken parts and the cracks and the broken pieces, and you put us back together in a way that's beautiful, that actually is magnificent. And you do it in a way where you get all the credit, and then we get to point to you with other people who are broken and say, look, there's hope. Look, there's help. Look, you don't have to stay on the floor. Look, you can still have a purpose. God, thank you for being that kind of God and redeeming us in a way that only you can. In your name we pray.